Imagine the phone ringing at 2 in the morning. Your son's voice on the other end, calm, a little embarrassed. He drove off the road. He's fine. Just stuck. Can you come get him? So you go. You drive out into the dark. You call his name. You flash your headlights. You wait. But you never find him. And the whole time, he is on the phone with you. Talking. Walking. Alive. Until he isn't. Until those two words, sudden and sharp, cut through the static of a May night in rural Minnesota. Two words that have never been explained. And then, nothing. The line still open. Breathing, maybe. Then silence. No footprints. No body. No goodbye. Just a phone call that ended in the middle of a sentence, somewhere in the flat and lightless dark of the American plains, and a young man who was never seen again. This is the story of Brandon Swanson, and 17 years later, nobody knows what happened to him. He was 19 years old, born January 30th, 1989, in Marshall, Minnesota, a mid-sized town in Lyon County, deep in the southwestern corner of the state. The kind of place where people know each other by name, where the landscape stretches flat and wide in every direction, where grain elevators rise above the horizon like monuments to patience and isolation. Brandon grew up there. He graduated from Marshall Senior High School in 2007, and by the spring of 2008, he was wrapping up his first year at Minnesota West Community and Technical College, studying wind turbine technology at the Canby campus, a program that said something about who he was. Practical, forward-thinking, not running from anything, moving toward something. By all accounts from friends and family, Brandon was not a reckless person. He was responsible, grounded. He wore glasses, had naturally curly brown hair, stood 5'6", and was known by people who loved him as someone you could count on. He had plans, concrete plans, to transfer to Iowa Western College in the fall, over 250 miles away. His first time truly leaving home. He was looking forward to it. May 13th, 2008, was the last day of the spring semester. The last day of classes. For a 19-year-old with a future ahead of him, that's a reason to celebrate. And that evening, Brandon did, attending a gathering with friends in Lind, a small town about 7 miles southwest of Marshall, and later stopping by another friend's house in Canby. He drank, as college students do on the last night of school, but people who were with him that night said he didn't seem intoxicated. Not visibly, not excessively. He was present. He was social. He said goodbye. Just before midnight, he got into his white Chevrolet Lumina and started the roughly 30-mile drive home to Marshall. He never arrived. Just before 2 a.m., Brian Swanson's phone rang. It was Brandon. He told his father that he'd driven off the road, that his car had gone into a ditch and gotten hung up at the edge of a gravel road, not badly damaged, but stuck, with one side of the wheels lifted off the ground. He was okay. He wasn't hurt. He just needed a ride. Brian and Annette Swanson didn't hesitate. They got in their pickup truck and drove out into the night, keeping Brandon on the line. Brandon told them he thought he was near Lind. He said he could see lights in the distance, lights that he believed were the town. He stayed with his car for a while, flashing his headlights on and off to help his parents locate him. They flashed back. They drove the roads near Lind, calling out, scanning the dark. But they couldn't find him. He couldn't see them. The darkness of rural Minnesota in mid-May is not the darkness of a city night. There are no streetlights, no ambient glow, just flat land stretching in every direction, and a sky that offers no comfort. The call dropped more than once. Each time, Brandon called back. He wasn't panicking. He was methodical. He told his parents he was going to start walking. He could see lights he thought were from Lind, and he wanted to move toward them. He told his father to drive to the parking lot of a local bar, Thymer's, near Lind, and wait. Brian drove there. Brandon kept walking and talking. 47 minutes into the call, at approximately 2:30 in the morning, Brandon Swanson said 2 words. "Oh shit." And then the line went silent. His parents didn't hang up right away. They stayed on the call, listening, waiting for his voice, waiting for an explanation, a laugh, anything. There was nothing. They called back, over and over. The phone rang. It rang. It was never answered. He was gone. Brian and Annette spent the rest of that night driving roads. They didn't know where he was. They didn't know what had happened. They searched Lind and the surrounding area until morning. When light finally came, they went to the Lind Police Department to report their son missing. They were told to wait. The officer on duty told them it was not unusual for young men Brandon's age to stay out all night after the last day of classes. One officer specifically told Annette Swanson that it was Brandon's right to be missing. They were advised to go home, to be patient. This would later become one of the most criticized elements of the case, the institutional assumption that a missing 19-year-old was simply being irresponsible, that the correct response to a frantic family was patience. It was an assumption that would cost critical hours, hours that might have mattered. Lind police did eventually begin searching later that morning. They found nothing. They then requested assistance from the Lyon County Sheriff's Office, and it was there, through the simple act of pulling Brandon's cell phone records, that the case became something much more complicated and much more troubling. The records revealed that Brandon's phone, during the call with his parents, had been routed through a cell tower at the intersection of County Routes 3 and 10 near Minneota, along State Highway 68, the main road between Marshall and Canby. But that tower was near Taunton, Minnesota. Taunton, 25 miles from Lind, in a completely different direction. Brandon had not been anywhere near where he thought he was. Think about what that means. He was on the phone for 47 minutes, describing landmarks, describing lights, telling his parents he was heading toward Lind, and he was 25 miles away, in a different county, on a completely different road, walking through farmland in the dark, legally blind in his left eye, moving toward lights that may have led him further from where help could reach him. Whether he knew this discrepancy existed is one of the questions that has never been answered. There is no indication from any account of that phone call that he understood how lost he truly was. The lights he saw, the lights he believed were the town of Lind, were almost certainly the blinking red warning light atop a grain elevator in Taunton. A light designed to mark height, not direction. A light that, at a distance, in the dark, might look exactly like a town. When investigators searched the area near Taunton using the cell tower data, they found Brandon's car. It was in a ditch off a gravel road about a mile north of Highway 68, along the Lincoln County line. The car doors were open. The keys were gone. The car was hung up at the top of a slight incline, wheels barely off the ground on one side, just as Brandon had described. Nothing inside it suggested violence. There was no sign of a struggle. The surrounding terrain was grass and gravel, leaving no tracks, no way to determine what direction he had walked. 2 counties' worth of sheriff's departments were now involved. The search expanded, and the landscape they were searching was not forgiving. Southwestern Minnesota is agricultural land in the most elemental sense. It is open, vast, defined by fields and fence lines and the slow geography of rivers and drainage ditches that cut through the flatness without warning. In May, before the crops have fully risen, the fields offer almost no cover. but also no reference points. At night, without a light source, a person walking through that terrain might as well be walking across the floor of a dark ocean. Everything looks the same. Distance is impossible to gauge. Sound travels strangely. Brandon had mentioned to his father during the call that he was passing fences, that he could hear water nearby. That detail about water became significant. Search dogs, bloodhounds brought in from Codington County, South Dakota, picked up Brandon's scent from the area near his car and followed it approximately 3 miles. The trail moved west-northwest, across field roads, past an abandoned farm, and then south, toward the Yellow Medicine River. The scent trail ended at the river's bank. The dogs could not continue. The Yellow Medicine River, in May of 2008, was running high. The spring snowmelt and recent rainfall had swollen it well beyond its ordinary depth. In some stretches, it was knee-deep. In others, it dropped to 15 feet. The current was fast. The banks were steep in places, slick with mud and new grass. Search boats from the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources worked the river. Divers went in. Aerial teams flew the surrounding terrain. Ground crews walked fields in organized lines for days, then weeks, then months. Hundreds of volunteers joined official search efforts. The family organized searches of their own. They walked. They searched. They kept looking. Nothing was found. No physical evidence of any kind. No clothing. No phone. No body. No indication of what had happened after that final 2-word exclamation. Brandon's cell phone continued to ring for days after his disappearance. Searchers could hear it when they called, but it was never physically located. The investigation faced obstacles that went beyond the terrain itself. Law enforcement had lost crucial hours at the beginning because of the initial decision not to take the missing persons report seriously. By the time the cell phone records redirected the search to the correct county, an entire day had passed. Whatever tracks Brandon might have left, in the grass, on the road shoulders, near the riverbank, had been walked over, driven over, rained on. The scent trail, once gone, could not be recovered. The geography itself presented problems that are hard to overstate. The search area around the cell tower covered a radius of 5 miles. That's roughly 78 square miles of farmland, river bends, drainage ditches, abandoned structures, and open field. Rural terrain of this kind is not easy to search systematically. Without a fixed point of last confirmed sighting beyond the abandoned car, every expansion of the search was based on inference and probability rather than evidence. Foul play was not ruled out. Investigators considered whether Brandon might have encountered someone on those empty roads in the early hours of the morning, whether the "oh shit" was not the sound of a fall, but a response to something else entirely. Something outside himself. Someone. But no witnesses came forward. No vehicles were reported. No evidence of another person's involvement was ever found. The theory that drew the most official attention in the years following was that Brandon had accidentally fallen into the Yellow Medicine River in the dark. He was walking toward lights in unfamiliar terrain at 2 in the morning, legally blind in one eye, moving through fields that bordered a fast-moving river that he likely didn't realize was there until he was very close to it. The scent trail ending at the bank, the mention of hearing water during the call, these details pointed in that direction. But extensive searches of the river produced nothing. State authorities eventually argued that if Brandon had drowned there, in the conditions present in May 2008, the current would have carried his remains downriver over time, and nothing matching him was ever recovered downstream either. The river has been walked, searched, and revisited across multiple search seasons. The result is always the same. Nothing. Another possibility, one that lingered around the edges of the investigation, concerned the topography of the area. Between the abandoned car and the river, The terrain is cut through by drainage ditches, some of them deep, some concealed by overgrown vegetation, some partially submerged during high water seasons. A person walking in darkness across unfamiliar land could step into one without warning. Some of these ditches are not visible until you are already upon them. Investigators and family members have returned to the area repeatedly. Different search teams, different equipment, different seasons, when the water is lower and the vegetation is less dense. The search has not ended. It has simply failed to produce an answer. That absence, the complete absence of any physical evidence, is what makes the Brandon Swanson case so deeply unsettling to anyone who studies it. Missing person cases that involve outdoor terrain almost always yield something. A shoe, a piece of clothing, something. The nothing that this case returned is statistically and emotionally anomalous. It is the kind of absence that the mind struggles to accept as real. Brian and Annette Swanson did not accept it. They have never stopped looking for their son. In the immediate aftermath, they organized searches, distributed flyers, gave interviews. They spoke publicly about the dismissal they received from law enforcement that first morning, the right to be missing statement, and they turned their grief into action. In 2009, less than a year after Brandon disappeared, they successfully lobbied the Minnesota State Legislature to pass what became known as Brandon's Law. The law requires that law enforcement agencies immediately take a missing persons report and begin an active investigation when someone, regardless of age, disappears under dangerous or unclear circumstances. No waiting period. No assumption of voluntary absence. No deciding from across a desk that a scared family's child has simply chosen to be gone. Brandon's Law has almost certainly saved lives. There is no way to know how many, but the people who wrote it, who fought for it, who refused to let their son's case die quietly in a filing cabinet, did something real with an unbearable loss. They changed the way Minnesota responds to disappearance. But the law did not bring their son home. The porch light at the Swanson home has been left on every night since May 14, 2008. Not symbolically, or rather, not only symbolically. It is a practical light. A light for someone who might find their way back. A light that asks a question into the dark. Are you out there? The birthdays pass. The holidays come and go. Brandon would have turned 37 this year. His parents continue to speak about him in the present tense, when they speak at all. The emotional weight of not knowing, of having no grave to visit, no final chapter to read, no moment of definitive ending, is a particular kind of grief that resists any ordinary form of processing. There is no closure available. Every year brings another search season. Every tip that comes in to the Lyon County Sheriff's Office must be taken seriously. Every phone call from investigators must be answered. The Lyon County Sheriff's Office has confirmed, as recently as 2026, that tips related to Brandon's disappearance continue to come in. The case remains open, active, unsolved. There are things about this case that have never been fully resolved. Questions that investigators and the family have turned over for nearly 2 decades without finding answers. Why was Brandon so far off course? The route from Canby to Marshall runs along Highway 68. He was found on a gravel road a mile north of that highway. The working assumption is that he missed a turn in the dark. It's entirely plausible. Those roads, at night, without streetlights or signage visible in the dark, can disorient a person, but it remains an assumption. Why did he believe he was near Lind when he was 25 miles in the opposite direction? The grain elevator light in Taunton is the most credible explanation for the lights he saw. From a distance, in the dark, a blinking red beacon on a tall structure can read as a town. But Brandon grew up in that area. He knew those roads. How he came to be so thoroughly disoriented, whether it was darkness, stress, the effects of alcohol, an unfamiliar stretch of road, has never been definitively established. What does "oh shit" mean? It is 2 words. It could mean anything. It could mean he stepped off a bank into water. It could mean he walked into a ditch in the dark. It could mean he saw headlights on a road and was startled. It could mean something else entirely, something that arrived from outside rather than underneath him. The brevity of it is the cruelest part. He had been on the phone for 47 minutes. He had been narrating his walk, describing what he saw and heard, maintaining contact. And then 2 words. And then nothing. The phone rang for days. Somewhere out in those fields, in that terrain that has yielded nothing, a phone was ringing in the dark, and no one could reach it. Cases like this, rural disappearances, no body, no confirmed cause, carry a specific weight in American culture. They accumulate meaning beyond the individual, beyond the family, and settle into something broader and harder to name. They remind us of how large the country is, how empty the spaces between its towns can be, how a person can be on the phone, warm and present and alive, and become, within a single sentence, a mystery. There is a type of fear that is not dramatic. It is not the fear of monsters or violence or obvious danger. It is the fear of the ordinary world suddenly becoming incomprehensible, of a spring night and a ditched car and a long phone call culminating in silence for no reason that can be explained. Brandon Swanson was not in a war zone. He was not in a dangerous profession. He was a 19-year-old on his way home from the last night of school. The landscape of southwestern Minnesota, those roads, those fields, that river, looks the same today as it did in May of 2008. The grain elevator in Taunton still blinks red in the dark. The Yellow Medicine River still runs high in the spring. The fields still stretch flat and silent in every direction, broken only by fence lines and old structures and the slow turn of wind turbines on the horizon. The very turbines Brandon was studying, the technology he had chosen for his future. He knew that landscape. He came from it. He was driving home through it. And somewhere in it, he stopped. The phone call lasted 47 minutes. In 47 minutes, you can drive halfway across that county. You can watch an episode of a television show. You can cook dinner. You can fall asleep. In 47 minutes, a father drove through the dark trying to find his son, and a mother listened on a phone to her child's voice growing more uncertain as he walked further into land he couldn't see clearly. And somewhere in those 47 minutes, something happened. A single, unwitnessed moment that has defied every attempt at explanation, every search, every technology, every year of effort, every sleepless night and early morning drive down a gravel road near the Lincoln County line. Brandon Swanson said, "Oh shit." And then there was nothing. Just the open line. Just the dark. Just the flat Midwestern silence of a May night with no one in it. He has not been seen since, and the porch light stays on.